Are there any announcements?
I do. So we can use people, faculty, to sign up to meet with next week's speaker, Aaron Garcia Ruiz, who's talking about antiviral silencing implants. I sent out an email and haven't got a hold of it on the spot.
Thanks so much. Our seminar speaker is today is Dr. Sarah Nusser, who is the Vice President for Research at Iowa State. And Sarah has an Iowa State pedigree. She got her PhD at Iowa State and then went off a number of years to work for industry at Procter & Gamble, and found her way back to Iowa State and has risen through the ranks. And she's going to talk to us today about the future of research.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I'll confess that I have a degree in botany. So my PhD is in statistics, but I started out in botany, and particularly plant ecology. And about the time I graduated with my master's, it became clear that I would probably never have a thriving job during that particular era. So I ended up going into statistics because I've always enjoyed analyzing information. And I have to tell you, it's a lot of fun for those of us who are statisticians because we get to work with a lot of different kinds of scientists. So today I just thought I would talk to you a little bit about, okay, it's hard to anticipate the future of research, but how we think about preparing for the future of research in our office. And one thing that is really fun about being in research is the landscape is always changing, whether that's in your discipline or really at a global scholarly level. There's something always moving about how we're doing research or the topics that are hot. So what's going on right now, and how do we really try and queue up campus to engage with the opportunities that are coming this way? So I want to begin a little bit with what does our office do, very briefly, and then talk about how we anticipate sponsored funding opportunities. And then there's lots of other things that connect to research practice that we also work with, and I want to briefly end with a little bit of that. I'm very happy to be interrupted. I will just keep plowing unless you raise your hand and ask a question. But if you have a question, then please raise your hand. And I also, for the department, or any department, whoever's here, I'm very interested in your ideas about what our office should be doing or what do you need to be successful in research. And the other caveat I want to put out there is we're one office among a huge community. So there are the researchers doing the work, being mentored and mentoring others. We have our colleges and our departments who organize the people and help us find individuals who might be interested in things. And then there's a whole host of central units that we work with. So this is actually, I'm going to talk about it as if we're doing this, but it's actually in collaboration with a whole lot of campus. So there's three things that our office focuses on. So for faculty of any discipline, we really try and make sure that we have the kinds of professional development programs and internal funding programs that helps people be successful. So because that landscape is changing, people need to learn how to go after grants, or they need to learn what's going on in a particular sponsor funding agency and what their priorities are. So we try and set up a program around that to help all of our faculty be successful. The second big thing that we work on is we really spend a lot of time trying to cultivate interdisciplinary research. Why is that? Well, the colleges at Iowa State really incentivize the research that happens inside their borders, so disciplinary research or interdisciplinary within that college. But what we do is try and work across colleges and in partnership with colleges to bring together teams that come from different disciplines. And so we have various kinds of professional development programs and internal funding programs, as well as interdisciplinary research centers that feed into that. And I'll talk a little bit more in detail on that. And then the last thing that I'm probably not going to spend too much time talking about is we have services that help you go after grants, the Grants Hub, and then submit it, the proposal, which would be the Office of Sponsored Programs Administration. We have a couple offices around responsible conduct of research, and then we work with various extension and economic development on how do we translate discoveries. So that's the big picture. And there's some things that I always feel bad about leaving out, but that are super valuable. So if you're a person who does solely disciplinary research, or you're a single investigator and that's the way you operate, we need that. So the fundamental research or basic research, disciplinary research, that's valuable in its own right. It's also the foundation to being able to do cool things in interdisciplinary research. And single investigator grants or small group grants or research collaborations, they're really important, and some people prefer to work that way, and they're very effective. It's also a stepping stone into larger initiatives. So these things are all super important to the research mission at Iowa State. So I want to talk about a couple different kinds of drivers in the system that we try and respond to. And the first one is really federal funding. There's kind of two levels we watch this at. There's all kinds of things I learned when I got into this job. Something that I never paid any attention to when I was a SAT faculty member is what is the administration putting as a priority for research? And that's done through the Office of Science and Technology Policy. So each year they issue a memo that says what would they like research funding agencies to spend time on. Under the prior administration, things like antimicrobial resistance, forensics, materials genome, and a myriad of other initiatives were put in place. And in fact, there was a focus on grand challenges broadly in that administration. Under the new administration, it's more focused on security of many kinds, including biosecurity, which intersects with some of the interests here, innovation that is translating the discoveries into the commercial space, and if you've been watching the news recently, there's been a big push for artificial intelligence. So data science is looming large in this administration. And the cool thing about this is it's a signal to a whole broad set of funding agencies. So it represents an opportunity where it's not just NSF we can go to, or USDA, or NIH, or whatever. We probably will be able to submit to multiple agencies. So it's worth investing in trying to create a group if it intersects with the strengths that you have at your university. And then the second thing is every agency has its missions and priorities. So I don't suppose there is a little NIH funding here. That's not, the National Institutes of Health isn't probably a big one for the plant path, but it is available. We see NIH in lots of different departments that seem unexpected, but they're really focused on human health. And NSF is more the science and engineering portfolio, and USDA is more on the agricultural side. So they have things that they're rotating through that are their important initiatives. So we look at that, and we try and make the Associate Deans for Research aware, and then we might take some proactive activities, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But one thing that is really clear, at least in the last 5 years since I've been VPR, is things are getting bigger and more complicated. So more and more we're seeing calls that they're calls for very complex problems, and they have significant impact downstream if you're able to make progress. There are calls that depend on multiple disciplines, multiple institutions, multiple sectors, and I know there's a lot of that going on in the plant path department. There's also more of a call around holistic conceptualization of problems. So you're not just working on the science part, but you're actually working on, will people adopt this technology, or what are their barriers to adopting this technology? Or is this ethically, are there concerns from an ethics perspective, or what's the regulation going to be, or what's going to be the environmental impact if I release this into the field? And then this whole notion of being able to translate discoveries through extension, which something a university like Iowa State has been doing for a long time to the public, but also commercialization and workforce development. That's becoming a higher and higher priority. So that calls upon us to really be looking ahead. What are the future opportunities? Start convening early. And really, one thing that we're kind of trying to dive into a little harder this year is how do we make the bridges between different kinds of disciplines that haven't worked together in the past? And so that's something that is a long game that we're trying to work on. The other set of drivers are really around what I call research practice. So when I first got into the office, NIH was just really wanting people to work hard on getting functional teams. And so we had a speaker come and talk about that, and then we developed our own guidelines, and now we have 2 academies associated with being able to develop functional teams that have clarity of roles, clarity of credit. So I was talking to somebody the other day about the need to specify what the divorce conditions would be if it falls out. I don't know if we do that, but that's also an important thing to think about. So that collaborations can be focused on the scholarship and be functional and expectations are known. NSF has been slowly moving from broader impacts, which used to be that you involved underrepresented groups in your research, moved on to ethical, legal, and societal impacts, such as what I just talked about. And now they're focusing on convergence of disciplines, really looking at big problems from multiple angles. Professional organizations with the last election really started focusing on communicating research to the public. So I don't know if you watch our programming, but we recently had the Ellen Alda Center for Communication here, and this guy ran a 2-hour workshop with 200 people, and it was amazing that he engaged everybody in that workshop. And I'll talk about these a little bit more later on. So there's lots of stuff happening and about how we do research that we have to respond to as well. Okay, so what do we do here at Iowa State? So the first layer in my mind is that we have predictable internal funding programs that people know they can hook into. So you might be an assistant professor coming in here and you have a startup funding package. That's just to get you started and get on the road. But when you become an associate professor, maybe you need another bolus of funding in order to change directions or form a new team. And so for the interdisciplinary research world, we have the Presidential Interdisciplinary Research Seed Funding Program. And so this is used for a lot of different purposes. It's always targeted at going after sponsored funding down the road. We've had researchers put an application in to convene research groups from different universities and sectors in preparation for a Science and Technology Center application to NSF. We've had people do pilot data under this. There's lots of different things that come under this, but the idea is you have a very cool high-risk, high-reward idea that you want to pursue enough to become competitive. Then further on down the road, you formed a team maybe here or through some other process. We have the Presidential Interdisciplinary Research Initiative, which is really for large transformational research that connects with significant societal impacts. And I want to give a couple examples of what that looks like. So the very first, so this has been in place since about 2014. The very first cohort, actually people in this department are probably familiar with the Crop Bioengineering Consortium that turned into a center. That was in that first cohort. The very first cohort also had the Nano Vaccine Initiative. That group collected and worked through a vision that went, this was really about being able to develop nanotherapies and encapsulate them in protein coating so that they would not degrade and you could get them into the body in the place that they needed to be. And so they had a conceptualization of research that really had to do with preparing antigens, how do you deliver them, how does it work inside the body, and then how do you deliver them to a person as a therapeutic. And so they kind of viewed this bedside to bench and back type cycling. And at this point, as a center, they've been a center for a few years, so they're about, I guess they're 5 years out. They have researchers from 5 different colleges, they've got multiple university partners, they've got 6 Iowa companies that they're working with, a couple national labs, funding from multiple agencies, and now they're starting to hit the really big funding. And they have some tech transfer going on. So this is the kind of, this is not the only form of this kind of big initiative, but this is the kind of thing that can grow out of some of the investments that we're trying to put in place. So another thing that we've done to help people sort of target what they're doing is because the Obama administration was really pushing grand challenges, and that meant a lot of universities were thinking, well, what are our grand challenges? We were also at the same time struggling to articulate the research portfolio at Iowa State. How do we describe all the research that's going on here? Because there's lots of incredible stuff. So we worked with the colleges and we had a faculty visioning team and came up with research themes. So these aren't challenges per se, but areas that Iowa State is working in that connect to grand challenges. having to do with healthy lives, whether that's plants, animals, the environment, people, communities, sustainable human and natural ecosystems, materials and advanced manufacturing, which is a huge strength at Iowa State, the enabling data-driven discovery and cybersecurity, which is something that just keeps living on and expanding, and then how we prepare our students to be engaging in the world and ensure that they become good citizens that help us build vibrant societies. So this was established, and it is now a focal point in that initiative program. So often these RFPs have an organizing principle, and this is ours. And just to give you some examples, I talked about the Nano Vaccine Institute. That's part of a larger initiative. I'm going to talk a little bit about antimicrobial resistance. There's a group that just formed in the College of Human Sciences that basically is taking the health research done, the human health research done at Iowa State, and translating it out to communities. These are presidential initiative projects that are much earlier than the one I showed you. We have a long-standing expertise at Iowa State in biorenewables, starting with the Bioeconomy Institute, moving into the Center for Biorenewable Chemicals, the Center for Metabolic Biology, and so on. Precision and digital agriculture is another big one. This was a group that came out of a lot of different threads at Iowa State. I would say it's still a collection of groups at this point. A recent presidential initiative project started in basically trying to do targeted interventions on the landscape to prevent water runoff and improve water quality, and so on. So we're able, this isn't exhaustive by any means, but we're able to sort of slot our research and talk to external stakeholders in this way. So it's good to be aware of that, especially for the faculty who might want to put in on some of these larger proposals. So that's a program we have, but we also respond opportunistically. So that's a strategic thing that we've set up, but we also want to be able to turn on a dime when we want to, because sometimes these priorities come up pretty quickly, and you have to figure out how you're going to go after them. Usually you can see them with a little runway, but so what we do in our office is we work with the Associate Deans for Research and individual researchers to convene teams in response to some of these large-scale opportunities. So National Science Foundation, for example, has engineering research centers, which are really big beast, science and technology centers, which are also significant centers, materials research, science and engineering centers. These are things that we can convene expecting that a call is going to come out. We also have, I kind of blew past this in the prior slide, we've been working with the state to set up groups that would be interested in developing technologies out of research that fit, that are good fits for the Iowa economy. Those include the vaccines and immunotherapeutics, precision and digital ag, and the biorenewable products. So we can, in response to interest, and actually sometimes we nudge people and say, wouldn't this be an interesting opportunity? We can convene. We have a staff in the Grants Hub that can run the logistics to make sure that we have meetings regularly and can organize a website or collaboration space. And then we have some faculty development that connects into this. I spoke earlier about the team-based scholarship type training. We have 2 academies. One is any individual can come in and take Team Academy 1. That will be held next year. And that goes through the, what are the healthy structures for a team and how do you navigate trouble. The level 2, we're trying out this year for the first time, whole teams go through. So the team goes in together, and then you work through sort of the business of how your team is going to operate. Think about how they're talking to the public with their research. For a lot of different reasons, but it's one way in which you can be visible. It's another way in which the citizens of our state and beyond can understand the value of the work that you're doing as part of your research. And if you haven't become aware of the conversation, that's actually a news, it's a nonprofit news generator that researchers can write an article for. They will help you edit. It's like 800 words long. written for lay audiences. They say an educated 16-year-old. And you can, if you are accepted into the conversation, that goes out to lots of different news outlets. Last weekend, we had a lot of chatter about presidents taking naps and executive time and so on. Well, we had somebody in history, Stacy Cordray, write an article about what have presidents done in the past with their scheduled time. And that one got picked up all over the place, and that went through the conversation. So it's a good way to become visible. It's not, I've done one of these, it's not too big of a lift. Okay, that's my little advertisement. So here's an example of a group that was responding to both disciplinary chatter and the priority of the White House. So under the prior administration, antimicrobial resistance was really becoming a big thing. They were starting to understand also gut biome, microbiome, and all that other stuff. And some researchers on campus wanted to pull together in College of Vet Med and Ag and Life Sciences. And so we started convening these researchers. There were probably 60 people, 65 people involved. We did things like set up speed dating program events and things like that to get to know each other. And they came up with an articulation of what they thought Iowa State should be working on and where the gaps were in our knowledge and expertise. So with that, they had done such an effective job that our office with Vet Med and the Ag College put together a seed program to fill those gaps. And it was very interesting because we put that RFP out there. It was an open competition for anybody on campus. And we picked up researchers from engineering and LAS. So that actually strengthened the team because we were bringing different kinds of expertise into the team. And that set them up to start looking for large-scale funding. Somewhere in the middle of this, it became clear that that the professional organizations for veterinary medical colleges and the Association for Public and Land-Grant Universities were going to have a competition about who could host a National Institute for Antimicrobial Resistance to organize research and education across the country. So this group was completely set up to do that, except for they needed to spend a little more time developing external relationships. So they went out and developed external relationships with commodity groups, with Mayo Clinic, Nebraska and Iowa, medical schools, and Nebraska's Lincoln campus. We put a pitch in, and lo and behold, we actually landed that consortium. And because we had done so much advanced work, we were ripe for that opportunity when it showed up. So now we have the National Institute for Antimicrobial Resistance Research and Education here. They're really in startup mode right now, but they are working with, for example, the Pew Foundation and the the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research to develop funding for convening activities and to begin developing a research portfolio. So this is kind of an unusual outcome, but these are the kinds of things that can happen when you're driving a larger group and you're open to the way in which opportunities appear. Okay. Let me stop there. Any questions about sort of this bigger landscape at all? Okay. So I just want to make, for those of you who are faculty here, make you aware of a couple other programs that exist in our office. We have a program called Bridging the Divide. It's actually due fairly soon, I think at the end of the month. And it's really meant to bring artists, humanities, social scientists together with STEM researchers. We also have ISU and University of Iowa collaborative seed grants where they put up some money and we put up some money, and the researchers put in a joint proposal, and we jointly decide who we're willing to fund to start those collaborations. We have some specialty seed programs that come from donations from prior faculty and interested alums. Probably the most appropriate one for this department is the Bailey, and that really allows you to do fundamental research that has a potential practical application. And so that's about 150,000. So that's one of our bigger seed programs. We also have, we are working with economic development to host I-Core cohorts where you can take technology in and really look at whether I've developed this discovery, does it have any market potential at all? So it's just sort of a pre-screening. And then for people who are interested in research, we do have a cost-sharing program, so we'll put up to a third in for up to $100,000. Also, if you're interested in publishing in open access journals, we have some support that if you don't have other grant funds, you can apply to have partial support for your open access journal. So there's a lot of things that are available through our program. I think I've already talked about most of this. I think I talked about this in the introduction, but basically we host a lot of professional development. If you're not on our e-news or watching the Inside Iowa State, then we'd be happy to sign you up for e-news or just keep watching because we advertise our programs there. So I want to turn back to a couple other things in research practice. So those are some of the things we do to try and sort of gin up opportunity and help facilitate people going in a certain direction. But we also have, research is very highly regulated, and I think those of you who work with different kinds of germplasm and agents that can be used for positive or negative purposes have been exposed to some of this. We get this pressure from the national academies, we get it from our agencies, and I just wanted to highlight a couple that we're dealing with now. What these things usually involve is some tension between a good purpose and a risk that someone's trying to manage. So today there's just a huge focus on foreign influence by the current administration. And really, scholarship has no borders. We work all over the world. There's things going on with many, many different countries here at Iowa State, and that's as it should be. But what the government has become increasingly concerned about is what intellectual property are we losing, what's happening when people come to the university, what's going on when we go to other countries. So I'll talk a little bit about that. And then the other one is really around public access versus security of data. So I'm really kind of throwing this up here at a very early stage just to give you a feel for what we have to deal with around this. What we've begun hearing is that the government is concerned, and our professional societies then, so the Association of American Universities and the Association of Public and Land Grant Universities, they start standing up a response that's sort of collective among universities. And so in the case of foreign influence, it's really important that we continue engaging in global collaborations, but I think we'll be asked to be careful as we do that, to really think about the risks a little bit. And when I was at the meeting for the APLU, they convened the provosts and the VPRs in a room with the FBI, for the FBI to say, these are things we're worried about and so on. It's kind of one of those interesting conversations where they can't tell you any details, but they want you to think about what you should be doing. So this is really kind of nebulous, but it's beyond what we've been already doing when we look at international collaborations. And so we're just convening conversations at the administrative level to just understand what are the concerns and how can we prepare campus to better manage the risks. So for example, and it'll probably focus on a few different things and behaviors. So if someone comes and volunteers in your lab, and you say, great, free hands, get that name before they can be accepted as a volunteer. One of the mechanisms people use is they'll send, people with ill intent they'll send volunteers to work for free, and that's sort of the incentive to accept them in. And is that someone that has a positive intent for volunteering? The second thing is just collaborating internationally. If you go to some countries, you can pretty much guarantee they're going to scan your hard drive or maybe put software on your computer. In other countries, they don't even let you take your computer in. So I think we have to get a little bit more organized about how people travel internationally in a way that's safe and they can protect their research. And then some affiliations have come under question. So there was a lot in the news about Confucius Institutes Iowa State does not have one of those. More recently, people have been talking about 1,000 Talents, and these are programs that individuals become affiliated with, sometimes to help their home country, sometimes that they think they're getting a benefit out of this. These things are all really in a jelly state for us right now, and it's our job really. We work with others in the university to try and figure out what's real here, what do we need to do, what is the lowest burden thing we can do to help manage risk. So I think you'll hear more about this in the future, but it's certainly, there's a lot of chatter on this on the national stage. And I just want to say up front that I firmly believe in global collaboration. We never want to turn into ourselves in doing our research, because a lot of things we work on really span the globe. So the second thing I want to share with you that has to do with research practice is really public access. And back about, now it's hard to believe this, but it was 6 years ago that, almost to the day, February 22nd, 2013, that the White House issued a memo that public research funds were being used to generate scholarly products, publications, data, and so on. And those publications and data should be made accessible to the public. The public paid for them, they should be made accessible to the public. So that's a great principle. And there are some caveats. For example, when you work with human subjects data, there's some privacy and confidentiality issues. Some of the data that you work with involve collaborations with companies, and there's proprietary information there. Sometimes it's national security that you're worried about. So share data, but make sure you're not introducing new risks associated with some of these concerns. The agencies are supposed to cover the costs of sharing data. I think that's still pretty nebulous right now, but they are increasingly requiring that we do this, so that this is moving more and more towards a compliance type activity for us. Here's another position I'll put out there that I actually think this is a great idea. We have, for hundreds of years, openly shared information about our scholarship, debated whether we agreed with the conclusions based on the information shared, and so on. And the internet and our capacity to do collaborations has just really changed radically over the last decade even. And so it's a way in which we can invoke transparency and scrutiny and debate in research. There's a lot of tools now. For example, you can pre-register studies. So it also connects to the debate over rigor and reproducibility. So if you have a hypothesis that you're trying to test, or a question you're trying to answer, you can pre-register this study. People know that this is what you're looking for, and they can't really accuse you of going fishing for the answer at the other side when you get to the data and analyze it. Some scholars on campus are sharing their lab notebooks as they collect data, so that their data collection process is open. There are sites for registering negative results, so that we get more of the experiments that yielded no answer to will this work out there. Of course, sharing and reusing data, publications, and so on. So there's lots of things that are burbling right now in response to concerns about rigor and reproducibility. And so this open scholarship not only is part of our tradition, but it's also a good way to get towards having the public develop more trust in our scholarship. We also know that when we collaborate, we go across the borders, and particularly important is the EU, the European Union, is really pushing hard on this, as are other countries. So they have gone so far as to put a Plan S out there that would really require that all funded research be published in open access journals. So in the sense that we're working in a global environment, we need to be able to respond, and we need to be prepared to respond. But this is no small lift. So publication is one thing. We know how to make publications. They're discrete things. The data is a totally different thing. For some researchers, if you work in genomic, if you work on developing genomes, or you work in astrophysics or math or whatever, this is like the currency of the realm. So sharing data is really part of the landscape. For others, it's just completely foreign. If people are already successful without sharing their data, why do they want to go through the extra work of sharing their data? And so as an institution, one of the things that we live with is we work across the box up of the institution. We have to bring a lot of different types of research areas on board that have varying levels of exposure to this idea, and they have different kinds of methodologies in terms of how they develop their data. And one of the things that really I think is a big lift for us is to do this well, you have to start with planning. If you plan at the beginning, I'm going to share data, then you will write down the things you need to know when you get to the end to share data. So what we've been doing is working with the library and the Chief Information Officer's office, including with faculty. We have 5 faculty members on something called the Data Sharing Task Force. So what they've done so far is put up some guidelines for data sharing that are just kind of a prototype policy, a workflow for how we become aware of the commitment that someone's made to share data in their grant, on through how do you vet whether you can share it based on those conditions, and how do you prepare and actually get the data out there. The library has started to put together some services around data documentation and sharing. They have, with the CIO's office, put in place Data Share, which is a repository. The data don't necessarily have to go there. They can go into a disciplinary or a journal repository as long as they're open access. So the links could be stored or the actual data sets could be stored. And this whole business of research planning, practice, and credit for sharing data is still on deck. And we're actually have this spring started talking to the library about how many different things are going on campus that connect to just open scholarship more broadly. And so we'll probably roll something out in the fall that really kind of articulates this in a more coherent fashion. So this is something that's a little further along than the foreign influence, but still is a research practice issue that we're trying to figure out how to grapple with. That's really quite complicated. So anyway, that's how we try and help campus get ready for the future, help our scholars stay at the forefront of the capability to engage globally. And I'd be happy to take questions, thoughts, or wishes from the audience. So thank you very much.
Questions for Dr. Nusser?
Yes?
I can ask lots of questions. So I have some issues about, well, there's a couple things about sharing. Be aware of, I don't know, people volunteering to come and get our information. And then the next slide, we're supposed to share all our data in the world so they can just sit at home and get our data.
Yes.
It seems like kind of a contrast. And also, I get like sharing genomic data, but sharing lab notebooks would be, there's a lot of like poorly designed experiments, things without control, people are just learning, they don't know what they're doing, and
Yeah.
some people might get a hold of this data and think it's real
Yeah.
when it's not.
Yep. Yep.
When it hasn't gone through peer review, whatever happened to that, I don't know.
Yeah. Excellent comment. I completely agree that we're in this bifurcated world where somebody over here is thinking about risk, and somebody over here is thinking about public investment, and we should share. And it is a weird world for us. I like to think of this all as a continuum, that there's a place where you're all the way, it's safe to share, and it's appropriate to share, all the way over to, nope, not a good idea. I think so I'm probably of your generation. I probably would not want to put my lab notebooks out on an open lab notebook just because of the way I am. But there are younger scholars out there that are using this as a way to ensure rigor in the process. So I am familiar with one researcher over in Ag Biosystems and Engineering, and it probably takes her more time to actually execute her research, but when she does it, she has an answer, and that is all public. So I think it's a little bit, so nobody's going to require that we have open lab notebooks or that you pre-register studies and so on, not yet. But we are going to be required to share data when it's appropriate off of our federal grants. and that comes at the end. But it is a different way of working for different scholars. So I understand where you're coming from. Other comments on sort of open access or?
Just one, I have one, Sarah.
Yeah.
From the journal standpoint, professional society standpoint, this emphasis on open access, which is being driven by the Europeans, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
You know, there may be some self-interest there because a couple of the major publishers that are fostering open access journals are European companies.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of professional societies in ag sciences and elsewhere are supported by journal income. So it would certainly serve the interests of Elsevier or Springer or some of these to have journals be sucked into their vacuum cleaner, but I'm not sure how that would serve the interests of professional societies.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So Plan S would be very detrimental to professional societies as they currently stand for the reasons that Mark's talking about. I know my society gets a lot of its income from journal subscriptions, and that's how it then does professional development and things like that. And so I don't think that the US is really ready for Plan S. And if you read, so there's some good articles in Science that have been tracking this over the last 3 or 4 months. Basically, some people in Europe have really decided to go all out, and they're trying to put pressure on the system. But I don't think we're ready to receive that pressure in a way that will keep our disciplinary societies intact. So, but it's out there, and it's going to come rolling down to us. So we can turn away and say we're not going to do anything about this, or we can start saying, okay, if we're going to have to do something, what does it look like? And that's kind of what our office tries to do, and I think that most disciplinary societies are having this conversation as well.
I had another question.
Yep.
About reproducibility of data, and that's become a big issue, internet and scientific societies and various other entities discussing it. I can't quite get my head around it logically. I mean, there are people online now, online websites that will sort of spontaneously take articles that are published and show that they're not reproducible or there's some flaw in the data and so forth. Okay, then they think they're doing a service, whatever.
Yeah.
But in agriculture, at least, you can do experiments 5 years running and get 5 different outcomes for different reasons. Could be weather, doesn't have anything to do with experimental design or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
So the concept of reproducibility of data, I don't know, what's the take of like VPR's office on that?
So reproducibility is one of those words that's overused. It's sort of like big data. It means something different to a lot of different people. And I think that it generally is being used in the medical literature where if you do, I mean, it's the same thing with fields, but you do a study with a cohort of people and you find, you know, something is related to something else. You do it with a different cohort of people, you don't find that. And I think a lot of people don't have a very sophisticated understanding that you can have 2 different answers. That's part of, I mean, when you run that statistical test, you could be wrong, you know, the nominal thing is 5% of the time, but you could just get different answers through biological variability. So I like to think of this more as rigor, that if our studies are well designed, and this is why I really emphasize the planning phase, if our studies are thoughtfully designed to answer the questions we want to answer to the best of our abilities, then we've done our job. So then it's the execution. I mean, design isn't everything. You have to execute according to the design. But if we're careful in how we do research, then we've got something that we can defend. And the thing that really makes me nervous about sharing data is that we do not have that that whole idea of design in the beginning. As a statistician, I can't tell you how many times someone came in to me and said, I have these data now, and I'd like to analyze them, and when you start talking to them about how they collected the data, it's very flawed. I would be very uncomfortable with someone putting those data out. And for that researcher, for Iowa State, for science broadly. So I think if we focus on rigor, I know the buzzword is reproducibility, if we focus on rigor and good practice, then we're going to be clean. And that's kind of the way I like to push that. So, yes?
Just following up on what Mark and Ellen said, I think the internet now, I'm really concerned about like the open data that's new or young or not, or maybe has a flaw, a notebook or something, just learning how to do one. That someone's going to come in and weaponize it and make it sound like totally opposite of what you're trying to accomplish. You know, you're doing bad science, you know, you're doing this and that. There's people out there that do that all the time.
Yeah.
Even
They can
though
do that with
even though
publications.
the original researcher was actually, had good intentions.
Yeah.
So is there something that your office can do to kind of make a one-pager or something that we can, I don't know, I'm just trying to think of.
How do you navigate that one?
How do you, yeah.
So,
Well, I think you've been going through with this open data concept.
yeah. So we are driving towards that. How do you do this in a way that is thoughtful and will help you get to the place where you have defensible results? So I think that we're not there yet. We're more on the systems thing and not on the practice thing. That said, I really think anybody with ill intent can take a publication and do the same thing. And so I don't think data is the only object that can be weaponized or used against. In fact, it's happening in our political discourse all over the place, where you pluck a fact out of a whole narrative and you say, well, therefore X. So I'm not so worried about that. I'm more worried that when we put things out, that they're defensible. And this is actually, so I've been working in the national circles on this topic, and we actually held a workshop last fall with 29 other universities to say how we're going to handle this. So it's something every university is grappling with, and it's just the path forward is not very clear. It's a very strong regulation given how little experience we have with being able to do this. And so we're just trying to thoughtfully go through, well, okay, how would we mechanically do this now? How would we help researchers do this well? It's going to take us a while. So ask me in 2 years.